Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hello and welcome everyone. I am very happy that you were able to join us today. My name is Nana. I am one of the members at ICIE and I will be introducing our speaker today. So our special speaker today is Todd Lubart. He's a professor of psychology at University of Paris and member of Institut Universitaire de France. He received his PhD from Yale University and was an invited professor at the Paris School of Management. His research focuses on creativity, its identification and development in children and adults, the role of emotions in the creative process, and intercultural issues. Todd Lubart is also a co-author of numerous books, research papers, and scientific reports on creativity, including the books Defying the Crowd, Cultivating Creativity in a Culture of Conformity, The Psychology of Creativity, and The Exceptional Children. He is the co-founder of the International Center for Innovation in Education and the associate editor of the International Journal of the Talented Development and Creativity. With us today is also Professor Taysir Yamin. He is a general director of the International Center for Innovation in Education, and he will introduce today's lecture. Please feel free as we are talking today to ask your questions in the chat, and we will also have a Q&A period at the end of the session.
Thank you, Nana, for this introduction. In this lecture, Todd Lubart is going to address a number of topics, including the origins of creativity and innovation, a new dynamic approach to study and investigate the conception of creativity, how could we measure potential creativity, a new battery for measuring potential creativity, the importance of teaching for thinking in general and productive thinking in particular, and current practices relating to nurturing creativity and innovation. Welcome again, Todd Lubart.
I am happy to be here today with you. My name is Todd Lubart. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Paris in France. And I thank Taysir Yamin for this invitation to be part of the conference today. I'm going to talk about creativity and how to measure it and its relevance in the educational sector as well as in life in general. So this story begins more than 2 million years ago when our ancestors were making tools for hunting, and more recently 40,000 years ago when they made cave art or scenes of hunting drawn on the cave walls. And so we see that we have this creative ability that's part of our heritage. And the question of today is how to measure it and how to educate it. This cartoon shows a potential scene with a teacher and her children in which one child has the idea of a wheel, and the others are carrying rocks up the hill. And however, this teacher doesn't recognize the creative value of this new idea. So we could say part of education is also recognizing what's creative and helping to promote it in the children or in the adults in higher level education. Okay. Here I have a slide that comes from the OECD from our colleague, Stéphane Vincent Lancrin. And the OECD conceives of education as involving, in fact, 3 main kinds of skills: teaching technical skills, teaching behavioral social skills like leadership, collaboration, communication, and teaching creativity and critical thinking skills, how to treat and handle information and move ahead in making progress in different domains. And so we're going to focus on the creativity critical thinking, in particular, the creativity skills. Now, in the World Economic Forum, there was a survey of CEOs, and in 2018, they listed creativity, originality, and initiative as the 5th item on important skills for success in the workplace. And they predicted in 2022, the list would change and creativity would move up to the 3rd most important skill of all for workplace success. This is also a slide made by the OECD team. Now, how do we define creativity? Well, you could be creative in almost any area of work, be it science, literary work, artistic work, technology, commercial and business world, culinary creation, for example. And it all involves the ability to generate new productions that are meaningful in their context. When we talk about creativity, we might be interested in what we call creative accomplishments, what people actually did, like the painting of Van Gogh. But in education, we're more often interested in what we call creative potential, the latent state of being able to generate new productions that are meaningful in their context. So if someone has a lot of creative potential, they could put it into their work and actually produce something, but it may remain at a latent state of potential. So when we talk about potential, we're interested in what you could do if you put it into play. It's like a walnut. The walnut has potential to become a big tree, but it also could become part of a salad. It could just turn into dirt in the ground. It could be a souvenir you keep on your desk from a nature walk. It could become part of a science experiment, or it could become part of a toy, as some children did with their walnuts, shown here. When you talk about creative potential, we can think about what Ribot in 1900, a well-known French psychologist, said, that every person has more or less of this creative potential. And if you put it into play, you may create, at least for yourself, something new. What you create may also be new for the larger society. And so it may be recognized as a great invention, but at least it's creative for you. And this creative potential can be described in different fields like artistic, mathematical, scientific, mechanical, commercial, or utopian, moral, political. And so he talked about creative potential not in general, but by domain. And you could have a higher level in artistic creative potential compared to scientific, for example. Here we see the multivariate approach to creativity. And we see creative potential in blue based on different domains. Like we said, artistic creative potential, scientific, literary, etc. And in purple, you see 4 kinds of factors or ingredients that help contribute to your creative potential. So we have cognitive factors like intellectual abilities, such as mental flexibility and your knowledge on a topic. We have cognitive factors like personality traits, such as openness or motivation to create. We have affective factors like your emotional state or your emotional trait. You may be in a positive state emotionally, and this might be contributing to your creative potential. And we have environmental cultural factors which could be a stimulating or inhibiting environment in terms of your social and physical environment and your access to resources, which can be an ingredient also in your potential. So all these ingredients come together to form what we call your potential, and you deploy your potential when you engage the creative process, and it leads to a production. This production could be more or less original. It's an achievement. It's, if you have many productions that are quite original, we may say you have shown creative talent. If you look at famous cases of creativity, like Van Gogh, you find that when you look in his life, you can find many of the different ingredients we mentioned, and they tend to come together at a certain moment in his career, notably when he was working in the south of France during about 2 years, and he had support from his brother, he had his artist friend Gogh, he had learned knowledge of other painters at that time, like he had learned about Jean-Francois Millet, who was a famous painter of the time and inspired Van Gogh with that knowledge to make his own compositions with his own colors in southern France. And you see here the similarity of the composition. And so all these ingredients came together to give a high level of potential to Van Gogh at the moment he was in the environment of southern France near Arles. When we talk about the creative process, it's useful to describe it in terms of two modes, two parts. So we're going to look at that now. The first part is divergent exploratory, in which you seek many different ideas in many directions. In terms of ingredients, if we look at cognition, personality, motivation, emotion, we have special aspects of these ingredients that favor the divergent exploratory mode of thinking. Like we said, mental flexibility, openness, motivation to seek novelty because you get bored quickly, and positive emotion favor the divergent exploratory part of the creative process. Here we see the convergent integrative part of the creative process, in which you need to bring together many ideas and put them into a new concept that you develop. So you converge on a new idea, you integrate many elements. And here again, we can look at the ingredients, cognition, personality, motivation, and emotion, and we can see somewhat different aspects of these ingredients favor the convergent integrative mode of thinking, like selective combination, bisociation, analogy use, perseverance and risk-taking, personality traits, need for achievement, motivation, and negative emotion tend to favor this second part of the creative process. You need both divergent exploratory and convergent integrative to have a full creative event. Let's talk about how to measure these creative potential. There are a number of measures, some you may know, like the Torrance test of creative thinking, the Wallach and Kogan test, the Angelin test, and the Mednick test, which are shown here. And these measure certain elements of creative potential, like divergent thinking, for example, in the Torrance test, in which you use parallel lines to make many drawings. Now, we studied the Angelin task, which you see here. In the initial part, a student is given various graphic elements, and they have to make a drawing using those elements. So this is an example of a convergent integrative task in which you make one drawing using different elements, and you see one child made a different drawing for each element, like the light bulb, the soccer ball, the house. Another child put them all together, integrating them in a larger thing called the elephant tank. And we studied this task in detail and found that indeed various scoring methods converge, and you can detect the degree of integratedness of the elements and the degree of originality of the idea that the child has. Based on existing measures, based on research we did on children's development, we worked on a battery called EPOC, Evaluation of Potential Creativity, which started in our initial work from the year 2000 to 2010 on basic research, and then we were able to have a French version of our measure in 2011 with artistic, graphic, and literary verbal domains and norms on a French population. Starting in 2013, we developed English, Arabic, German, Turkish, and other language versions together with Tazir Yamin as our collaborator. And in 2014, we started to expand to other domains in addition to graphic and literary, to social, math, science, and music. In 2015, an OECD research in 10 countries used it as a pre-post measure of creative development to see if teaching helped develop creativity. And we are working on expanding it to dynamic assessment methods nowadays. So how does it work? Children are given a task to do, which is either divergent exploratory or convergent integrative. They do both. And they do it at 2 moments, 2 different days in a given domain, like artistic, graphic, verbal, literary, or also in social creativity or scientific, for example, or mathematical. So we put the child or individual in a kind of simulator and ask them to show what they can do. This is a measure of creative potential. Here is a result of a child in France who was given the banana shape and made 10 drawings in divergent exploratory thinking. 10 drawings, is it good? Depends on what's average for children in France of the same age. It turns out that in France, the average child around 10 years old tends to produce about 10 drawings. So this child's production is typical for their age. Here you have an example of a convergent integrative drawing in which the child used many of the graphic elements we provide and made one big drawing. And you see here the different elements are in a kind of room, like a child's room. This is not a very original idea of making a drawing, but it shows the different elements that we gave. Here's another example of the same elements used together a bit more coherently in a fishing scene, also a relatively common idea for French children with these elements. Here's a somewhat better drawing in which the same elements are used in a swimming pool scene. And so for example, you can see the light bulb has become the body of a little person, which is an interesting flexible use of the light bulb. And there's a coherent story here because it's all around a swimming pool, which, by the way, is the transformation of the rock that we gave them to use, which was a black rock. Here's 2 other children who made convergent integrative drawings with the same elements. And you see there's even more integration, more unusual use of the elements. And the drawing on the right shows what one child calls the samurai warrior, in which the light bulb is the body of the warrior, the fish is the warrior's head, and the sword is made of a carrot and a wood mannequin, finally. So there's a lot of unusual uses, and it's all put together in one single entity. So it's a good example of integrative, convergent, creative thinking. Here's an example from Brazil where it was used during the OECD study. So this is the same elements yet again, and here we see, for example, a typical idea of a house with a slight original element, the snowman. Here we see a more creative drawing in which the wooden mannequin has become in charge of a marionette composed of a light bulb with a carrot nose and a fish. So this is an example from a Brazilian context. And we have a kind of platform where people can see these drawings, they can compare them. And studies show that judges are able to learn the system and have good agreement after a short training. So this was a study to show that teachers or students can, in psychology, could be trained to become good judges of these different productions. Now, what do we do with the Epoch scores? We can situate a child compared to other children in terms of how well they do. Is their potential relatively high, superior, average, or limited? And we can examine their potential in the graphic and verbal domain, for example, on divergent and integrative processing. And we can put the child in the distribution. Here you see a distribution proposed in which 100 is a typical child, 115, 130, these are standard deviations above the typical. So it's much like an IQ system that you may know. And the child can be described in terms of their personal profile. So this child here is relatively stronger in divergent graphic and integrative graphic compared to divergent verbal and integrative verbal. But even in the verbal domain, the child is relatively average and just above average in the graphic domain. So this is a child's personal profile on the different measures. Studies we have done show that the different tasks we developed fit together well, and underlying these tasks, there are factors like integration and divergence by domain, verbal and graphic. And we did a study to compare EPOC in Paris with French children and EPOC in Hong Kong with Chinese children. And we found they have a very similar factorial structure in those two different contexts. We also looked at different tasks in EPOC, and we were able to decompose what goes into the task in terms of integrative or divergent factor, domain factor, verbal or graphic, and you see in black the small but existing general creativity factor that is a little bit in each task. However, the main part of most tasks is its integrative or divergent and domain content factors. Now, you might be wondering, is creativity related to regular intelligence measured by IQ? And if you go back to Binet, whose picture is shown above, the picture of Guilford, Binet was trying to study intelligence in a global way in children in France in 1900. And in the first tests of Binet, he included measures of creativity. However, he quickly got rid of that part and kept only the logical reasoning and knowledge measures, because he found that logical reasoning and knowledge predicted school grades in France in early 1900, and creativity measures did not predict school grades. So intelligence became measured by Binet type test, which became later on the source of the Wechsler IQ test, which is used today. And so it got somewhat distinct from creativity measures. And if you give children or adults IQ and creativity measures, you find they correlate very low. Kim, in a meta-analysis, found they correlate 0.17, which is quite low, but positive. And if you correlate school grades and creativity, they also correlate low, like 0.2, 0.1. So like 0.2, 0.1. So in general, IQ and school grades are relatively unconnected with creative potential, but this is partly due to the historical development of IQ tests. Here's the result of a study in France where children passed the EPOC and the WISC-4, and the correlations are all relatively low, around 0.10, 0.20, for example, sometimes negative even. In this kind of approach, it is possible to talk about the gifted, the high potential. And we could talk about the high intellectual potential who have a high IQ, usually defined as 2 standard deviations above the average IQ of 100. So it's defined as an IQ of 130. And in a similar way, using an EPOC test, you could detect the high creative potential who have 2 standard deviations above the average kid in a country. In other words, an EPOC score of 130 or more. So it's just parallel to how we often talk about giftedness using IQ. And here you see in the distribution, children who have 130 or more would be in the high potential zone or gifted zone. Now, a few words about developing creativity. There are 2 approaches. Either we could train the ingredients that help people to be creative, like mental flexibility, openness, divergent thinking, or we could give a more general school curriculum which gives a lot of activities to be creative and deploy creative work, like a Montessori, Freinet, or other school type structure. The OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, studied in many countries during several years if teachers in general can boost the creativity of their students. So it came out in a book recently, the results of this study, led by Stéphane Vincent Lancrin, and the field work was done in 2 phases in the various countries indicated by green on the world map. And so there were 20,000 students in total in 320 schools, primary and secondary. This involved more than 800 teachers and their classes in 11 countries. And to give one of the measures of creative potential, pre-test, post-test, was the EPOC measure. So it was used in these different contexts. Here's a result, kind of result that was obtained coming from Thailand. In this graphic, you see control classrooms and experimental classrooms where teachers deployed creative lessons. In the control classrooms, teachers did normal teaching and just had pre and post-test. Pre-test is in blue, post-test is in orange. If you look at divergent exploratory, DE, thinking, the control group has a slight gain from pre to post, but the experimental group has a significantly stronger gain from pre to post, suggesting that teaching was effective. In the convergent integrative measures, you see the control group gain from pre to post, and did the experimental group. This gain was not really much different from control to experimental, which suggests that in this particular context in Thailand, the results suggest that the biggest gain was due to divergent exploratory thinking gained through exercises for creativity. Now a few words about creative potential in adults, because we are also working on a creative profiler type method in which we can measure different ingredients in adults, and we can predict their potential in various jobs. So here's some examples. So if you look and compare designer and manager jobs, according to people in those jobs, you see what they think is more or less important in terms of ingredients for creative potential. And you have the managers in yellow and designers in green. So we have, for example, risk-taking characteristic. Designers say it's very important in their job. Managers say it's relatively important in their job. If we look at agreeability, you see designers think it's not that important to be creative, whereas managers think it's relatively more important in their job, probably because they're involved in managing a team and keeping positive emotion in the team at a high level. And then we have, of course, openness, which is very important in both designer and manager jobs. So you see some of the stars appear, which show significant differences in their estimation of what is important. Now, here we have an example of some of the profiler measures in the tool. There are some questionnaires, for example, that assess personality traits in which people self-declare how they live and work, and we estimate their personality traits. I'll just continue to discuss like that to give you the feeling of what we can do with the profiler. So when we work with the profiler tool, we measure these various ingredients, be they personality traits, cognitive ability, like mental flexibility, and we're able to get a profile for each individual on these different ingredients. If you think about it, it could be like you can be described as a spider web type profile that we can compare to the ideal profile in various jobs or in various sectors of study. And we can use this profile to help detect creative potential and to help develop the potential in students or adult workers in their job, because they may have an ingredient that is slightly less developed than another ingredient in a comparison group who's being very original, creative in that sector or job. And so this kind of profiler tool is useful in education to help see how a student is doing and give them some specialized, individualized training that can help them boost the ingredients they need. We had a few uses of this kind of tool in educational settings. For example, in an engineering program in Paris, the students took the profiling tool at the beginning of the year. Teachers developed activities to help improve creativity that students could access based on their profile. And at the end of the year, we gave the profiling tool again, and we saw that some students had advanced more than others on these different ingredients for creativity, bringing their profile more in line with an ideal profile to be maximally creative in their engineering domain. In another context, professionals who were recognized as creative took the profiler. Their profile became the somewhat ideal profile for that job, and younger staff in a company took the profile, and we could see which of them was more in line with this highly performing creative group, and they were given professional development to help improve their creative abilities. And so this was an example of a different approach compared to the EPOC approach, in which we are able to measure the actual ingredients underlying creative potential. In the EPOC approach, we put people in a simulated situation of creating. We ask the children or adolescents to act as if they were little artists or writers and to produce work. And then we are able to compare the work they produced, which is an indicator of their creative potential, to other children, adolescents in their country in the same age group and benchmark their creative potential. So overall, in this presentation, the idea was to look at creativity, creative potential, how we measure it, and how it can interact and be relevant in educational settings. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, my dear friend Todd Lubart, for your impressive and interesting talk. We highly appreciate your contributions to the ICIE.
Hello.
Yes.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Hello. Actually, it was a very nice lecture. I really enjoyed it. And this is the first time that I feel that I'm really integrated into the idea. But I have a question. How can the teacher be trained so that she can consider this student is a creative student or not, according to the battery?
Okay. Well, I'm happy to, thanks for your question. And I say hello to everybody because actually I'm here with you live, even though the talk was recorded. And sorry, I had some technical issue during the talk, which usually happens live, but for the first time it happens during a recorded talk. And so in the EPOC battery, you will see that there are examples of children's work, which gives an idea of what deserves a high score and a low score and a middle score. And so when a teacher or a psychologist or any professional reads over the manual, looks at this work, these examples, it gives you a kind of idea. Oops.
Sorry, I have to unmute people. Sorry, Todd.
Yeah.
So you can unmute after I do this. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. So when you have the EPOC materials, you get examples of children's answers which give you the prototype idea of what deserves a high score, a middle score, a low score in different tasks. What's interesting is since the children use a specific task, they don't make a drawing about anything they want. They don't make a story about anything they want. This creates a limited universe of kinds of stories, kinds of drawings, for example, and it facilitates the scoring. So it makes it easier to compare children to each other and to reference them to the benchmarks that are provided with the kit of measures. And so we have found that just by looking at the manual and examples already, most teachers or psychologists can do quite a good job of scoring because they see the examples. But if they do a little bit of training with extra examples, they will get even better in applying the scoring system. And in the divergent thinking measures, the key is the number of ideas children give, so we don't look in detail at the content. In the convergent integrative measures, that's where the benchmark examples become very useful. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is from Joyti. So please go ahead and unmute and let us know what your question is.
Hi. Hi, Naina. Hi, Tasir. And thank you, Todd, for a very, very perfect, to the point, precise presentation. And creativity is definitely, I'm from India, and creativity is one of my passionate area. Presently, I'm working on developing a mathematical creativity test. So it has been tested in India, and now we would like to go for more countries to make it more culture free and standardized. So my question is basically, because when you're talking about creativity in subject domains, so we can talk about creative potential in mathematics or in languages or in science, social science. So how do you assess the construct of discipline related centric construct in that in the evaluation? For example, if I take we talk about mathematical creativity, so will you look into the problem solving dimension, or you'll talk about the conceptual dimension, or you'll talk about the algorithms, developing multiple algorithms, or simple mathematical communication?
Okay, thanks for that question. And first, I'd like to say that in the EPOC type system, we do measure creativity by domain. So we have the graphic domain measures, the verbal literary domain measures, and we have developed social creativity measures, mathematical and musical. And we're working on a last domain of body movement and science. Those are our domains. Now, the approach we have taken, there are two main approaches that could be taken when you measure domain-related creativity, because first, we believe that all creativity uses some knowledge. It is applied to a sector. You are not creative in some kind of esoteric general way that applies to all sectors. So if a child has knowledge, it may come into play when they create in the sector of activity. Now, in mathematics, this is obviously a very relevant issue because some children have more advanced knowledge of math than others. And in our approach, we take a very basic task in each domain. So in math, for example, we would favor the very elementary mathematical operations as the only necessary basic knowledge. If a child has more advanced study in math, they obviously still master addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And so they might use that more advanced knowledge to do very original things in this basic math topic. However, there is a whole nother line of testing of creativity, which gives different measures based on your school grade or knowledge level. And in that line of testing, you would get, young children would get some basic math task like addition, subtraction. Older children would get some equation task, for example, or they would get some task that uses more complex geometry, for example. And so this is this second method means that different age children get different tasks based on what is most likely mastered for that age of children. Okay. And we do have some work a little in that approach that we try to do together with the Ministry of Education in France. And so I'd be happy to be in touch with you or other colleagues, people who are here today, who are interested to be in touch about these kinds of issues. For example, in this case, mathematics, because we are trying some grade targeted measures, which are not EPOC style. And so this is the alternative approach. And there's points that are favorable or positive or negative to each of these two approaches.
Okay, and continuation of this discussion. So where will you put the intersection? For example, when I'm talking about, let's say, mathematics creativity, so it doesn't, it may require some of the context, may require integration of social context and mathematics, science knowledge and mathematics. So where will you put these kind of intersection in this evaluation?
If you take a actual, let's say, science competition situation in which it could involve math and scientific concepts together, for us, that task represents a combination of two more basic domains, which is math and science creativity. And so there are a great number of, let's say, mixed discipline tasks, okay? Like making a illustrated book with the story and the drawings. This is obviously a mixed task that draws on the creativity of graphic and the creativity of verbal. And so in our approach, we measure the basic domains, direct, let's say. But yes, there are a probably unlimited number of mixed task situations.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Hello. Hello, may I ask?
Oh, sorry, can we just answer the question from the chat, and then we'll come back to you, please, just to keep the order going. So there's a question in the chat about whether emotional intelligence affects creativity, and if it does, to what extent?
Okay, so emotional intelligence is generally taken to concern the knowledge of emotions, the knowledge of how emotions evolve in a chain of emotional events, your ability to master and control your emotions, and your ability to interact with the emotions of other people. And so it is taken as a kind of intelligence, a kind of ability. Now, in general, in the creativity literature, there are a few studies of emotional intelligence and creativity that suggest that in social creativity situations, being creative in a social interactive situation where you might be doing leadership, problem solving of group conflict and so forth, you can benefit from emotional intelligence because it's a kind of knowledge in that domain. Otherwise, there's a lot of studies about emotion and creativity that do not concern emotional intelligence, that concern your mood state, like if you're more happy, sad, and to the extent to which you have idiosyncratic emotional responses in situations, but that's outside of the emotional intelligence topic. So that's the quick answer to your question, which is a whole section of research, in fact.
Perfect, thank you. I think we're going to take two more questions, if that's okay. We have Yasemin with the raised hand, so you can go ahead and unmute. And then there's another question about adult identification in the chat, so we will cover those. So Yasemin, feel free.
Thank you. Good afternoon for all. Thank you, Professor, for your wonderful presentations. My question is, how is the reliability of the battery results affected by the abilities of the persons measuring the creative potential?
Okay. In the battery that we developed, the EPOC battery, for example, first children are tested at a first session where they do a task of divergent, exploratory, and convergent integrative in a domain like graphic. And then they are tested again about a week later in a second sitting in which they do another task of divergent, exploratory, and of convergent integrative. And we look for the stability across the two sittings of the test. Since we have standardized instructions and standardized material, as long as the test supervisor gives the instructions as they are supposed to, and they give the material which is included, normally all the children have similar conditions and they have the same timing as specified. And so we try to assure that children are all tested under equivalent conditions. Of course, we are not there to oversee and view that it runs smoothly as hoped, but we do tend to find that for the vast majority of children, there is pretty good stability from sitting 1 to sitting 2. And so we are able to take the average of their 2 scores of divergence or their 2 scores of convergence, making a more stable estimate of their potential at a certain moment of testing, which is just a 1 week period between the 2 sittings. And so our studies suggest that it is a rather robust method to test children's creative potential. Robust because we have several guidelines that are very clear of how to roll out the testing, and the results suggest high stability. So we have done a few studies where we changed test givers, test supervisors, and we have not found any issues really in that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then we will have the last question since it's already 3 minutes past 7, and it's coming from Nisreen. And she's asking about any tests that measure creativity for adults. Her question is specific to media students. So, but I think we can.
Okay. So for adults, there are essentially either you give them a simulated task that is like the kind of thing they would do in their job sector, in their area of study. So if it was design students, you'd give them a design task and they would design something, and their productions would be compared against each other because they all have the same task in a given classroom. You could give them a design task that would be essentially divergent exploratory type thinking about their design topic, or convergent integrative thinking about their design topic. If it's communication, they can make a communication campaign, for example. Okay. The other method is what was evoked with the profiler method, in which you could try to identify the ingredients that are most important to be creative in a domain like communication or like design. And you could measure those underlying ingredients through questionnaires or tasks like mental flexibility and so forth, and get an estimate of people's potential because they have more or less of these underlying ingredients. But this is the second approach to measuring in adults. So either they do a simulation task like in their field, or they do we measure ingredients and try to estimate their potential that way.
Okay, I think this is the last question for today. So thank you so much for attending this talk.
Well, it's certainly nice to be here with all of you. I thank Tazir for the invitation to participate, and I hope you feel free to be in touch by email if you're interested.
Yes, sure.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go now because I understand the program continues.
Yes,
Tazir.
you are now free.
Okay, so bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.